You are listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. My co-host today is Michelle Jewel Shaw, special education teacher at the Rochester, New Hampshire Middle School and chairperson of Friends of Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouses. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Jeremy, and hello to all of our listeners out there.
Today is May 14th, 2023, and this is episode 225 of Lighthearted. In a few minutes, we're going to listen to part one of a three-part interview with Barry Porter, a former lighthouse keeper in Newfoundland, Canada, who has written a new book. I want to wish everybody a happy Mother's Day, and of course, happy Mother's Day to you too, Michelle. How's your spring going?
Well, it's going pretty well, Jeremy. We finally have some nice weather now. It's busy. School is very, very busy right now, but it's going well, and I'm glad that the weather is nice now, finally. So
yeah, we had a
couple
stretch
weeks of rain.
Yeah, that's New England for you in the spring. It can be rainy and cold, or suddenly 90 degrees. And
right.
Last couple of days are actually, 80 or so? It's pretty warm.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Very nice. Yeah. Regular listeners know that both you and I are very involved with our local lighthouse here on the New Hampshire seacoast, Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouse. We've talked about it on the podcast before, so I don't want to get too deeply into it, but we're still waiting to know when a new walkway that leads out to Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouse. There was an 80-foot walkway. It was washed away in a storm. We're waiting to know when that'll be completed before we can actually start scheduling our tours there for this season.
Yeah, hopefully it's done sooner rather than later, but we can't rush things. I guess it will happen when it's time. So
yes, you're right. It's kind of out of our hands. The Coast Guard is involved in this, so it hopefully is going to happen soon. But we do want to mention that we have 3 lighthouse cruises scheduled out of Rye, New Hampshire, which is close to Portsmouth here. We have 2 sunset cruises that will go near 2 lighthouses on each of the cruises on June 16th and 23rd. And we have a daytime cruise that will go near 5 lighthouses. We call it our annual 5 lighthouse cruise on Saturday, September 23rd. All the info about those cruises is on our website at portsmouthharborlighthouse.org. Again, portsmouthharborlighthouse.org. I'll be in all 3 of those cruises. I hope you will be too, but I know that depends on what happens with the tours, because you can't be in 2 places at once, right?
Right, exactly. So we'll have to wait and see what happens, and I'm hoping to get on at least one of them, so.
Yeah, the sunset cruises are always nice.
Yeah.
So I hope maybe we'll see some of our listeners on board. So let's move along here and tell everyone about today's guest, Barry Porter.
Sure, Jeremy. Barry Porter worked as a lighthouse keeper on the northeast coast of Newfoundland with the Canadian Coast Guard for 23 years. Born in the small farming community of Porterville, Barry attended a one-room school with no electricity or plumbing with 10 students from kindergarten to grade 5. Later, he attended a vocational school in Lewisport.
Over the years, Barry has worked in several professions as a welder, a photographer, a lighthouse keeper, and later as the curator and manager of the By the Bay Museum in Lewisport. His lighthouse adventures began at Surgeon's Cove Head Light Station on Exploits Island. He also worked at the historic Long Point Lighthouse on Twillingate Island and Bacalao Island Lighthouse on an island near Twillingate. He was the last keeper to live in the old keeper's dwelling at Long Point while he was working there in the 1980s.
Barry's new book, Adventures of a Lightkeeper, was published in 2022 by Flanker Press. The book describes the isolation, adventure, and beauty of these places, as well as the history of the lighthouses and their keepers. One chapter is devoted to Barry's efforts to rehabilitate a paralyzed beagle that lived with him for many years. Barry is an avid outdoorsman and a proud father of 2 children. He lives in beautiful downtown Porterville, Newfoundland, with his wife, Alice, and his present beagle, Lucy.
I really enjoyed Barry's book. It was a great experience getting to talk with him. This interview ran pretty long, but I enjoyed every minute of it. Because it ran rather long, I've divided it into 3 podcast episodes. We'll hear part 1 now, parts 2 and 3 over the next 2 episodes. So let's listen to part 1 of my conversation with Barry Porter now. Speaking today with Barry Porter, who is a former lighthouse keeper in Newfoundland, Canada. And Barry is the author of the recently published book, Adventures of a Lightkeeper, a great new book that I recommend very highly. Thank you very much for joining me today, Barry.
Hey, Jeremy. Nice to talk to you.
It's pronounced Newfoundland, right?
Newfoundland. I always tell people, you say, understand Newfoundland.
Newfoundland. Yeah, for a lot of people around here tend to say Newfoundland, I think, but
Yes.
Newfoundland, that's what I thought. So Barry, let me ask you, starting out here, I want to get into some specific stories about the lighthouses where you stationed and everything, but what made you decide to write a book about your experience as a lighthouse keeper?
Good question. I've had it kicking around in the back of my head for 10, 12 years, maybe. I left the Coast Guard in 2006. When COVID hit, I had extra time on my hands, and I just thought my unique career should be told about. I'm a bit of a reader. I've read books on fishing captains, soldiers, loggers, you name it, politicians, but around these parts, there's very few books on the actual life spent on these remote islands. So with the shutdown, with COVID and the lockdown, I started dabbling with it and started putting it on paper, and I started posting a few pictures on Facebook. And the reaction I used to get was amazing. Like, I just took it for granted that everybody went to work, I guess, sort of in an 18-foot speedboat, dodging icebergs. And the more I thought about it, the more I figured it was a story to be told there. And I started it. Took me about a year and a half, but once I started putting it on paper, it really came out of me easy. It just flowed.
Mm-hmm. Well, you did a great job with it. And I was just thinking, there's been books on lighthouse keepers' experiences in other parts of Canada and in the U.S. and some other countries, but I don't know of any other book about the memoirs of a lighthouse keeper in Newfoundland. I could be wrong about that, but I think you may be the first.
Yeah, there's not many around. Very few.
Yeah. When I was reading the book, I was thinking there's so much detail in here. It made me wonder if then the years while you were a lighthouse keeper, if you kept a journal, if you made a lot of notes about your experiences, or do you just have a great memory?
Well, I don't know about the memory, but I kept a journal, and I still do to this day. Mm-hmm. I had a young minister visit me when I was at Long Point Twillingate early into my career, and he stayed at the lighthouse with me for a couple of days. Nice guy. And somewhere along the road, he said, Barry, you should keep a journal. And I thought about it, and I started. And it's a good thing I did because, like I said, I still keep it to this day. But when I started my book, I could go back and pinpoint the exact day that a certain event happened. If, the ship was some shipping incident or supply ship or a bad storm, I was able to go right back to the exact weekday and make it sound more legit than just a general guess at it. Yeah.
My good friend Chris Mills lives in Nova Scotia, but actually served as a lighthouse keeper on both coasts of Canada. Wrote a book about his experiences. He did the same thing. He kept a journal. And I think in both cases, it really puts the reader right in the middle of it because the description is so vivid and everything. So much detail. So before you became a lighthouse keeper, you had some experience as a welder, right? You tell a story in the book about how you applied for a welding job on an oil rig and something happened, something disastrous actually happened that led to your career as a lighthouse keeper. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, I was a welder for over 5 years. I worked in a couple of mines at Western Canada, in northern Manitoba, and in the oil industry in Alberta. And I moved back home and worked at a local welding shop here. But at the same time, the offshore oil industry was really taking off in Newfoundland. And they had this new drilling rig, the Ocean Range, was owned by Holdico out of New Orleans. And they were staffing the rig. So they had a big push for workers, from a welder to a cook to deckhand. They're fitting at the rig. And I said, they were offering big money. So me and two of my buddies drove into St. John's, a 4-hour drive. We went in and done the interview at the hotel in there. And there was hundreds of men around applying for these different jobs. And I was lucky enough, they picked me. I got through the first interview session. And then I was required to go to the hospital and have a really thorough medical. And I passed that as well. So I was on the waiting list to be a welder out there. And so a bunch of men got jobs there, no doubt, electricians and pipe fitters and riggers. And I was just waiting for the phone call for a job out there. And February the 15th, 1982, there was a terrible, terrible storm offshore. And the Ocean Ranger went down with taking 84 men with it. And that spooked me and said, I don't want to work offshore. And I was getting tired of the welding. It was a dirty job, good money, but it's not a really clean profession. And I decided to switch gears and look elsewhere. And I ended up getting an interview with the Coast Guard and started my career as a lighthouse keeper with the Canadian Coast Guard.
Was that something you had ever thought about before?
No, wasn't on my radar one bit. My dad's a farmer. I could have went farming, but that was a lot of work, 24 hours a day. And a friend of mine he'd been working at the Coast Guard for a year or two before me, and he enjoyed it. And I just, out of nowhere, I just put in an application for it and booked a job there.
Mm-hmm. And so then in 1983, your first assignment was as a relief lightkeeper at Surgeon's Cove Head Lighthouse, right?
Yes.
And on the Exploits Islands, do I have that right? Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Can you describe a bit about that location and what the place was like?
That was my very first shift was September '83 on Surgeon's Cove Head, which is on Exploits Island. Exploits Island is a pretty little island. Actually, it's two islands in one. It's approximately 4 miles wide by 2 miles long, and it sits on the edge of the Atlantic. The Bay of Exploits is south of that, but it's a major shipping route. And so I got positioned there for a shift. That lighthouse was built in 1911, and it's a month on, 32-day on shift and 32-day off shift. So you had this 20 miles out the bay, so I had to, jump aboard my speedboat, my father's speedboat, and go out into the Atlantic to the island. And it's a really nice light station. It's a big dwelling. It was built in around 1960, I think, and it was called a double family dwelling. Back in 1960, 2 families actually lived there. One family on one side, one family on the opposite side. So it was 2 kitchens, 2 bathrooms, 4 or 5 bedrooms on each side, and a full basement. But now in the 80s, it was just down to lightkeepers. So it was me and another keeper there, and you had the house. Just off from the house to the north of the house was the main light tower. That was a cast iron structure. Just to the right of that was the engine room, and that contained the 3 Lester diesels that generated power for the lights and the fog horns, furnace, and the whole system, right? So it was a big station. You had a little drop pad right next to the engine room. So if a motor had to be replaced, the diesel motor had to be replaced, the helicopter could come right nearby and just drop the motor or lift one off. And back behind the house was a much larger helipad. I don't know what the measurements of that would have been, 50 by 50 maybe. And that was the main pad for the choppers. And we had we kept a dozen drums of jet fuel there as well. So it was a big dwelling, and just down below that, towards the gulch, was where we would lift and lift up our supplies, our monthly supplies. It was a landing. You were probably 200 feet above sea level there, but it was a big spar and boom. They were all anchored down with galvanized cables, and it was a diesel winch. So you would swing your boom out over this cliff, dropping it down 200 feet, and open prey your body's down in the bottom in a speedboat with a net full of supplies. So you click on your net, winch that up, and pull back in the boom, and that's how you would get your supplies. So we've done that for years and years. Later, the chopper would be around for in the wintertime, but in the spring, summer, fall, you'd transfer your supplies in this gulch down in under just down below the lighthouse. So it was it was a nice laid out, well kept lighthouse station.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll get more into getting on and off some of these places as we talk today. I know it was could be an adventure. At a lot of them, but typically, tell me how many men were assigned to a station like that, and how long in a stretch were you on there?
Well, 4 lightkeepers were assigned to that lighthouse, so you would have 2 working per shift. I would go out for 32 days, me and a co-worker. After 32 days, we'd come ashore and the other guys would go out. So it was 4 men rotating on the shift for 32 days at a time. A few years later, on the end of my career, the Coast Guard shortened the shift to 28 days. Not much difference, but you're gone for quite a while, right? When you're gone, right? And this lighthouse was 20 miles out the bay into the Atlantic, so you're a good ways from home.
Let's get back to landing at these places again for a moment. Did you have any close calls getting to that station? Anything memorable?
Yeah, I worked on 3 island stations. 2 of them, was I had some life risking changeovers. The worst one probably ever happened was out on Surgeon's Cove in the 90s. We'd been out working shift for 32 days, and we were due to get off. It was December 21st, actually. And the helicopter, that time of year, we always changed by helicopter, Canadian Coast Guard helicopter from St. John's. But they would have to fly, 200 miles to get there. So if you had bad weather in St. John's, there was no chopper available. And it was stormy weather, it was terrible conditions. We were already a day or two over our changeover date. And we were getting anxious to get off, and the 2 lightkeepers coming on for the Christmas shift was anxious to get out there and get it started. And we waited several days, and no chopper flying. And finally, and it was a storm coming. It was bad at the time, but it was a storm forecast called for several days of even more higher winds and big seas. So the boys made the call to our reliable boat that we used to hire, and Ford Rideout came out in this 20-foot speedboat, the 2 lightkeepers and all their supplies for that month, and we done a changeover, but it was really high risk. We had mountains of sea. The sea in this little cove was like a flush box. In the summertime, you can get right in and drop your winch with the net and winch up, but if conditions are bad, you throw your supplies onto the side of the cliff where there's a lightkeeper hanging on for dear life, and he would throw the boxes back up. And that day, they came out by about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, because we waited for a chopper, but it didn't happen. And we were there. Took us about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. The seas, the speedboat would fall and lift anywhere between 15 to 20, 25 feet. And just white foam around. Ford was a really capable boat operator. And he came into the cove, or to the edge of the cove, and he dropped his anchor, which I've never ever seen him do before, just for some more control. And he'd wait and wait and wait. And when you see the slightest little break in the swell or the sea, he'd dart into the cliff, throw one box out, back off again, wait, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, throw another box. And finally, we got all the boxes thrown ashore. And then we had to get 2 bodies out of the boat and 2 bodies in the boat. And we done this little dance in the cove for, like I said, about 45 minutes, almost an hour, to get 2 lightkeepers off. And then me and my co-worker Harts had to jump into the boat. And the trick is, you got to, when the boat is in this sea, in such movement, you got to, when the boat is at the very peak of the swell, that's when you got to jump.
Yep.
If it's starting to fall, you're going to miss it. And we put an extra effort into it because it was Christmas coming on, but we broke every law in the book, every safety rule, and but we got home for Christmas, and the two guys got to work. But it was a really scary changeover, and looking back at it, it spooks me to this day, really.
Yeah. I've had some adventures getting on some offshore lighthouses, but nothing quite that hair-raising, I think. So,
in the winter, like the rocks were icy and slippery. We had survivors down, and it was just a bad. We're lucky we done it, and we're used to it, I guess. But it was pretty risky.
Yeah, I was just thinking of something. I just want to say to our listeners that I'm going to try to cover a lot of ground today with these questions. But. We're not getting into anywhere near all the stories in your book. So I don't want people listening to think, oh, I heard this interview, I don't need to read the book now. So if you're hearing this interview, I recommend very, very highly that you also read the book, because there's so much more detail in there that we can get to today. So I just wanted to get that in. Okay. Let me ask you about eating and cooking at these places. How did that work? Did you take turns cooking?
Yes. When I was on Bacalao, that was another lighthouse that I worked on. We cooked every dinner there. The lightkeeper on ship was responsible for cooking. So he would cook, say, today's dinner, and the next day the other keeper would cook it. So on Surgeon's Cove Inn, there we cooked supper instead of the dinner. So the lightkeeper on ship would cook supper, and the next day the other guy would cook. And so when you go out, you planned your meal plan before you go out. You had to take out your supplies, because you couldn't go drop down to the local grocery store. You'd had to take out, you knew for sure you had to cook 16 suppers. So you take your groceries, your frozen foods, all your supplies, and put it in boxes, tie it up, and you'd always take a couple extra in case you got stuck there a few extra days. Once you got there, done a few shifts, you always had a few extra meals in the kitty. All the lighthouses had big deep freezers in the basement, so everybody always, try to keep stockpiled a little extra. But you take turns cooking every second day, basically, is what you do. And you looked after your own breakfast and your own other meal, but the guy on shift cooked the main meal every day.
Mm-hmm. So it wasn't just throwing a microwave dinner in the microwave for 3 minutes.
No. You when you're away from loved ones and you're out there isolated, you want good food. So we really put pride into our cooking and cooked up good meals, good hearty meals. Chicken, fish, steak, whatever, roasts. We always ate well. And but I've heard stories, rookies coming out with 32 frozen meals and just terrible meals, right? But I was lucky. The guys I worked with, we all supported each other, and you had a good full belly when you went to bed anyhow.
Good, yeah. You made me think of. I think I remember hearing about lighthouse keepers somewhere pretty much living on peanut butter sandwiches, or Spam sandwiches. That was a common thing.
Probably, yeah. I know one guy I ate was either turkey legs or turkey necks. You would take out a full month's supply. That was the only meal he cooked every day. Not for me.
Right. No, not for me either. So you have a lot of your own photos in the book, and you're an excellent photographer, and you've been nice enough to email me some photos lately. You did a lot of photography during your years as a lightkeeper, and also, I believe, videography, taking video as well. Was all that a hobby for you before you became a lightkeeper?
Yes, I was always into taking pictures. I bought my first Nikon in 1976, my first 35 millimeter. So I always took pictures, and that helped me with writing the book. Not only did I have a journal, but I had pictures of everything I done. And once I got working on the lighthouse, there was just more opportunity to take more pictures, and I carried my camera everywhere. So it's in my blood to do the pictures. And I used to do wedding photos years ago and whatnot, and a few magazine pictures here and there, but taking pictures is in my blood, and still to this day I got two Nikons kicking around somewhere.
Yeah. Well, it's great that you documented this stuff, both with your journals and then, writing it in the book, but also recording with the photography as well, because most lightkeepers didn't do either of those things. So you've done a real service by doing this. And I just want to mention also, you and I figured out by email that we're very close in age. I believe you're just a few weeks older than me. And that's right about the time I got my first Pentax K1000, my first 35 millimeter. Yeah.
Nice cameras. I'm quite familiar with those.
Yeah. Very basic manual camera, but I had a couple of them. They served me well for many years. Yeah. So in 1984, you transferred to Long Point Lighthouse at Twillingate. You stayed there for 4 years. You were a full-time keeper at that point. It's one of the really, I think, one of the iconic lighthouses of Newfoundland. What was life like there?
Yes, I went to Twillingate in July 1984. The position became available, and I applied for it and got it. Right, at Long Point Twillingate was a land station, so you could drive there and drive home. So on the island stations, it was rotational, 32 days on, 32 days off. Long Point was 7 days a week, year round. So there had to be an 8-hour watch every day, year round at Long Point. So I went there for 4 weeks originally and worked from 8 to 4 and commuted back and forth, which was a long commute, but I needed a job. I needed to get more experience, the better. And after my 4 weeks was up, the whole lightkeeper who I filled in for, Alan Roberts, really nice gentleman, he decided to retire. He had enough years in, and he took retirement. And I stayed there for another 4 years. So my 4 weeks worked out to 4 good years on Long Point. And that lighthouse is, that's sort of a tourist mecca, Long Point Twillingate. You get bus tours there every day, hundreds and hundreds of tourists crawling around. It's really, it's a really beautiful location. You're 300 feet above sea level. It was built in 1876. And, the view is amazing. You're right on top of the ocean. And there's it's considered iceberg alley. So you get icebergs this time of the year for the next few months, few whales, lots of shipping. And the original house is still there, standing. It too was a 2-family dwelling, and I was there by myself, just me and my beagle, in a house that had 2 kitchens, 2 living rooms, 2 bathrooms, basically 5 bedrooms on each side, with the light tower. The light tower was attached to the dwelling with a little hallway to take you up into the tower. Next to that was a long tunnel, keep you out of the elements, out of the wind, that led you down to the engine room and compressor room where the foghorn was. So it was a really, beautiful, beautiful location. And but the tourist was amazing. I never experienced anything like it before. Yeah. Luckily, in the summertime, I had 2 or 3, 4 students working there during the summer months. But after that, I would talk to the tourists and tell them the history and give them a tour of the light tower. And it was a really nice spot.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but were you the last person to live in that house, the keeper's house there?
Yes. The original keepers, Alan Roberts, the guy I replaced, and Igna Sharp, those gentlemen and their family, they moved out of the lighthouse in the early 70s and moved into their own houses into the town of Twillingate and Crow Head. So the house had been vacant for probably 13, 14 years. Keeper working there, but no one staying there overnight. And because I had a 3-hour commute, 1.5 hours down, 1.5 hours back, after I went full time, I asked the Coast Guard in St. John's at the office in there, can I stay at the lighthouse instead of this long commute every day? And after some thought, they agreed with me that I could stay there the 16 hours that I wasn't working. And if anything happened, I was still lightkeeper, but, off ship, I was on call if there was some marine incident or just security for the site, right? So I was able to live there, and I moved out in 88, and nobody's ever lived in the dwelling since. So I my claim to fame. I'm the last guy to ever live in that beautiful old lighthouse.
Yeah, lucky you. So I think it was at Twillingate there that you met your wife, Alice. Is that right?
Yes, that came with, that came shortly after I went there. She was working there as a pharmacist at the pharmacy in Twillingate, and she was from a nearby town up from where I grew up. So I knew her and her family, and she happened to be working there for a few years, and we connected, and
the rest is history.
We fell in love, and we're still together to this day. So
yeah,
it worked out good.
And you have 2 kids, right?
2 kids, yes.
Yeah. I think we'll talk about them a little later. But this is a pretty broad question. But what were some of the things you did for fun in your free time at that light station and the other ones where you're stationed?
Well, Twillingate, like I said, you had human beings around you all the time. I wasn't isolated by no means. I had tourists knocking on my door, every hour of the night, wanting a tour or wanting this or whatever. So, plus I made friends with the community. I got involved. I basically lived there, so I got involved with the hockey there in the winter time, and there was always something to do. On my time off, I'd go hiking, but I worked 7 days a week, so there was very little time off. I got holidays after a full year. I finally got 3-4 weeks holidays, but I had to do an 8-hour watch, which was crazy, but that's what I did to keep my job. It was a one-man station, so I was responsible for the whole time I was there. So there wasn't a lot of half time. Nighttime, got involved with hockey and met a lot of good friends. Out on the Highlands, now that was totally different scenario. There was nobody around, so you had to. I basically tried every hobby there was in the book. From I taught myself how to play guitar poorly. I tried oil paints, sketching, writing poetry, pictures, and video things. Done a lot of hiking, a lot of exploring, wood carving. Carved soapstones. You got to keep yourself busy on these islands on your downtime, and especially if it's bad weather, you get stuck indoors with high winds and fog and rain, and you got to keep busy at something, right? Or you lose your sanity.
Yeah, kind of like making your own fun, as many people have done at lighthouses over the centuries. Yeah. In your book, you write quite a bit about your dog, your beagle, Gypsy. In fact, I believe there's a chapter devoted to Gypsy in the book. And I know she meant a lot to you over the years. Can you tell our listeners a bit about Gypsy?
Yeah, Gypsy she was my beagle. I've had beagles all my life. I got Lucy here now. I've had beagles since I was a young boy. And Gypsy was my second beagle. She was probably 4 years old when I got that position at Long Point Lighthouse. So I went down there, and like I said, I moved into the lighthouse, so that was my home. So it was just me and my dog there. She was with me 24/7 at the lighthouse, and wherever I went, she went. She lived a good life. She lived to be 14 and a half. She worked the 4 years with me on Long Point Twillingate, and then she done several shifts with me out on Bacalao and a few on Surgeon's Cove Head. So I call her the Lighthouse Beagle. But 3 years into my stay at Long Point Twillingate, she had a slip disc at a serious accident. My wife and I was away, my girlfriend at the time, were down in the United States on motorcycle. And she had a slip disc and went paralyzed. The veterinarian wanted to put her down, the local veterinarian. My parents wanted to put her down. And I was too attached to her by then, especially spending all the time weathering the storms in Twillingate, like in the wintertime, in the fall. It gets wild there. And then, she was my companion. And I was refusing to put her down, put her asleep. And the vet said, well, it's a long shot. You can fly her to the Guelph University Hospital in Ontario. And so that's what I done. Flew her up there, and by now, too many days had passed after her accident. They still thought, the outcome was very, very poor and wanted to put her to sleep. And I said, no way, do the surgery and I deal with it. Because I was in a position where I could look after her. She was with me 24/7. So if I had to do physio or whatever, I was willing to do it. So they done the operation in Ontario, and we were touring through the States, so it sort of speeded up my tour a little bit. But I was in Long Beach, California, actually, when I got the word that she was paralyzed. So I was on the totally opposite side of that country. She had the surgery, and we visited her in the hospital at Guelph, Ontario. And the poor thing still, her hindquarters was just a piece of rubber. It was sad, right? She had no control over urine, bowels, and anyhow, it was a pitiful sight, but I was willing to deal with it. So they gave me a few days to get back to Newfoundland. I got back to the Lighthouse. I flown her back to Gander, picked her up, and brought her back to the Lighthouse. And then I had a paralyzed beagle on my hands with a scar about 7 inches on her back. So they told me just try physio, try swimming with her. And I was determined to give it a try. And young and foolish, I don't know, but I love my dog. So every day I flex her toes, I flex her ankles, her knees, her hips. I do a session like I think it would take 10 or 15 minutes, but I would do that 4 or 5 times a day. And they said swimming was really good. So this was August, September. So I used to take her into the local ponds and go swimming with her. And, 2 months into it, was nothing happening, right? I was getting discouraged. She was getting water infections. She was having sores on her toes where she was dragging, because I welded up a cart. Being a welder, I made a canine cart where she could drag her hind legs, right? But anyhow, I had her at the Lighthouse doing all this work, and the tourists, it's funny. The tourists would come up over the hill looking, at this majestic lighthouse, and could be whales out there, and they'd be more interested in my beagle than the landscape. It was, people from all over the country was taking pictures of my dog. Anyhow, I was continuing my physio on her, and finally one day, getting in well into the middle of September, the water was getting cold, but I got a kick. I was swimming with her, she kicked, and that was the first indication that there was a signal leaving her brain, going back to her legs. So that was inspiring. That kept me going, and I kept it up for another 7-8 months, and she lived another 7 years after that, 7.5 years after that. She didn't recover 100%. I considered she was front wheel drive. Her front legs muscled up, but her hind legs did work, and she got full control of her bladder. Bowels, I had to watch the timing, but she lived another 7 good years and got to 2 other lighthouses, and it was quite the journey with my beagle. And my wife knows what I went through, and my dear old vet, every time I see him, he was a boater, so he respected my job that I had. But if I see him at the marina, he'd give me the big nod or salute, because I'm probably the only guy that ever attempted this and kept it up. But it worked out good.
I guess so. Yeah, it's a great story. And I'm just thinking, in spite of that accident, I think she was a lucky dog, and she had a good life for the most part. Good. So I think you're both lucky to have each other. So getting back to kind of making your own fun at these places, there's a story you tell in the book about a time at Long Point where there was a communications tower, right? A really tall tower, and you had kind of an adventure when you climbed it one time.
Yeah, I went there in '84, and that was the same time that the Canadian Coast Guard erected a brand new 270-foot communication tower right in the park lot. So they put the big tower there for the VHF radios and whatnot. For their radio, the main radio, Coast Guard radio station was back in the bay near Loon Bay, but they would bounce the signal from Loon Bay to Long Point and then out over the ocean, giving much more range. And it was all brand new when I went there. Was a trailer right at the base of the tower with all kinds of high-tech radio equipment with their own diesel generator and whatnot, all surrounded with a chain link fence. And I had the key for it. So when they were installing it, the riggers would come out, and I got to know the boys. They would climb up the towers and put on hoist protections and change the lamps and do work on the on the towers. And so they gave me a safety belt. I used to go up with them. Technically, I wasn't allowed to do it, but I was just helping out my co-workers. And from time to time, I would take my safety belt and climb up this tower, 270 feet, with a safety belt. You're enclosed in the triangle inside of the tower. I would take my camera with me. So I was being a camera nut. I was trying to capture the best pictures, which I did at different levels, 200 feet, 270 feet. And I do it in the fog. I do it in sunrise, sunsets. I done it a few times. But this one time I went up to the very top and something up my safety belt misfunctioned. It locked up. The brake got stuck. And I'm up in the very top of the tower, 270 feet, plus it's on a parking lot, which is almost 300 feet above sea level. So it's quite the view up there. I'm basically 600 feet above sea level, and my darn belt is stuck. And I'm trying to figure out now what am I going to do here? And I had to keep my calm. A little windy up there too when you're up that high. The only reason I was up there because I had a good safety belt on and I felt comfortable. But I had to take off my comfort belt and fiddle around with the brake and get it reworking again. Whatever happened, the spring or something, a misfunction on it. Holding on to my camera at the same time and hanging on for dear life, because it's not the place to panic or faint or pass out. And after a bit of tweaking, I got the belt to work properly, or the brake system. I reattached it and slowly climbed down, taking a couple more pictures, and that was my very last job as a tower climber. It spooked me.
I would think so. It would spook me. I'm not especially afraid of heights, but that would really, really, really spook me. The only thing I can think of to compare it is that I've gone up in small helicopters a few times where they take the door off for you so you can take pictures. So you got nothing. You're just you're strapped in, of course, but so it doesn't compare. It's perfectly safe, but boy, that would have been scary. So let's just change the subject a bit here. I think people generally know there's a long tradition of seal hunting in Newfoundland. You mentioned seal hunters a few times in the book. You mentioned helping some of them who are in trouble at times. And maybe you want to say something about that, but is that something you ever tried yourself, seal hunting?
I wasn't really a seal hunter. I did try it, attempted once. When the seal hunters were on the hoist or out in boats, we kept an eye on them and interaction with them. My only time, I went out once from Bacalao, and it was a flat, calm day. There was Arctic ice all scattered throughout the bay, but it was loose. You could weave in around it in your speedboat. So it was a nice day. It was in May month, and my co-worker Ralph Early, he'd seal hunt quite a bit, right? He was a older gentleman, right? Most of the people I worked with were all older than me because I was the new kid on the block for years because automation was a threat over our heads. So with very few young lightkeepers in the system. So Ralph is who I worked with for 4 years on Bacalao, just about 4 years. He used to go out hunting, right? But I never ever tried it until this one day. I went out, flat, calm day, and I'm out with, I got a Lindemann shotgun, and it's pretty tricky. You got to be good at it because you got to operate your boat, maneuver around the hoist hands, and if you see a seal pop his head up in the water, it'd be just a black shiny spot you see for a second or two. It takes quite a bit of skill to do all of it, and I attempted it a couple of times and had no luck whatsoever. So I went back to the lighthouse, and on Bacalao, you had to manually winch your boat out of the water, same as Surgeon's Cove, but not quite so tricky. So I just winched my boat up and called it quits. My biggest encounter with the seal hunters, or a rescue that I helped out with, was when I was back on Long Point. Twillingate got a really big history of, it's a fishing community, so they fish, they hunt turs in the fall of the year, or arc seals in the winter if conditions are right. My biggest memory with the sealing is one time I was at Long Point Lighthouse, and the hoist had been packed in for weeks and weeks, northeast wind. The Arctic ice stuck to the rocks, and it was like concrete. And the season was right. There was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Arctic seals, thousands, scattered throughout the ice. So the 28 guys, the hunters, they were really, when conditions were right, they go after get a few seals for the meat and the pelts and whatnot. And this day, it was a bright sunny day. The ice was packed in, and there were seals around. The birthing season had just was lined up properly. So there was 2, 3, 4 dozen sealers out, scattered out from Long Point, Twillingate. And I went up to the light tower. Just you're up 335 feet above sea level when you're in the tower. So you got a good bird's eye view of what activities happening on the ice or on the water. So I just looking, keep my eye on what's, get a rough idea how many men is out there trying this brave seal on. And I went back down for lunch, had lunch, and an hour or so later climbed back up to the tower. And when I did this time, there was the slightest change in the conditions. The forecast called for a storm coming. So I guess the wind was shifted, the tide was shifted, and this ice that had been packed in for weeks, there was no shipping. It was that tight, the icebreakers couldn't even operate. But outside, 100 miles offshore, the pressure eased off, something shifted, and there was these hairline cracks just starting in the seascape that I was looking over. I could see 25 miles visibility. And it was just these hairline cracks starting, and which means it's going to get a lot worse. And the whole Lightkeeper told me that Long Point has this tradition of setting off the foghorn if those conditions occur and there's hunters on the ice. And I was there 4 years that time. 3 years later, it only happened once, but I see this little small short leads of water. It was like a crack in a windshield just going across. And I scurried down to the tower, ran down the tunnel to the foghorn building. And Long Point at that time still had big air compressors, had the air horn, right? Yeah, I think it was rated for like 10 miles. So I just turned on the thing manually and let her pump up, and then she blasted, right? And clear sunny day, no fog. As soon as the hunters heard this blast from Long Point, they knew it was trouble. They dropped everything they were doing and hightailed it back to land. They knew there was something happening, and that was a warning. So it was dozens. So I went back up to the tower. Sure enough, they were all heading back to land, and they dropped their, if they had any seal carcasses, they just dropped them there because they knew the ice was opening up. And you see the leads of water, which was 10, 20 feet, was now 100 or quarter a mile, and it spread to a half a mile. And they all got back safely. They were lucky. It could have been lost, right? Especially with a storm coming. And I went down, they left from 3 communities, Crow Head, Wild Cove, and Sleepy Cove, which is a small park. And I went down a couple hours later and talking to 2 or 3 men that just got in, because it took them an hour or 2 to get back in or more. And talking to one group of hunters, and they thanked me for the setting up the foghorn, because they said they came across this lead of water. It was only 20 feet wide, but it might have been a mile long. And they said they were equipped, luckily, with a jigger, which is a hook and string. And they got on a little ice raft, threw the jigger across this lead of water, hooked it, and came across it and got in safely, right? But, a Lightkeeper was on watch. It proved that a Lightkeeper was valuable that day. But that's my seal story anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think you probably saved some lives that day. And you use that phrase a few times in the book, a Lightkeeper was on watch. And I want to get back to that eventually, but
yeah, sure.
You definitely made a point there. So there's a great story in the book that I really liked, the story about the veteran keeper, Jack Roberts. I know a Jack Roberts, but this is a different Jack Roberts. He was in his 80s, when you tell the story about him. He went into the hospital after a fall. So what happened? Maybe you could tell a little background of that. What happened when you visited him in the hospital?
Yeah, Jack Roberts, like I said, I went there in 84. Mr. Roberts, he retired in the 50s, I believe, or 60s. He was well up there. And Roberts's and Sharps was the families that sort of looked after that lighthouse. I was a porter. I was an outsider, right? But Jack Roberts was a well-respected man there in the community, Lightkeeper for, I think, 40-odd years, him and his wife. He never had any kids, but the lighthouse was his baby. When I first went there, he used to come up and drive around the parking lot a couple times a day, look out over the ocean, and he had his binoculars and just leave and come again. And I asked a couple of local men, like, he don't drop in and say hello or visit, right? He was too attached. Like when he retired, he couldn't go back and visit the lighthouse. It was too painful for him. But I hear some great stories of him rescuing seal hunters, and he was a dedicated old salty dog, right? So I never ever spoke to him. I seen him many, many times, and he just wouldn't come up and speak to me. And fast forward to 1986 or 87, I think it was, I was in Gander Hospital having an operation. I had trouble with my nose, sinuses. I broke my nose playing hockey, actually. Uh-huh. So I was in to get my nose and sinuses cleaned up. I was in there for a week because I had some complications. And on the end of my stay, the nurses told me that Lightkeeper Jack Roberts was admitted in the middle of the night. He had fallen and broken his hip, lived by himself. His wife had passed away, and he had to crawl, I don't know where, a long distance in the house. Took him a long time. I think he used to faint, pass out. He was in a lot of pain. And he finally got to a phone the ambulance, and they took him into Gander Hospital, which is an hour drive from Twillingate or more. And he was in bad shape, but I think they done hip surgery with him. So he was a couple rooms down from me, right? I was thinking, gosh, I'd like to go down and talk to him, but I think I went down in his room one night. He was sleeping, but he was in a lot of pain, discomfort. And I went back to my room, and he had no family around. And the night before I got discharged, midnight, I heard this commotion out down a couple rooms down from me. And, I knew it was coming from Mr. Roberts' room. So I waited for a bit and then walked out to the nursing station because I was feeling healthy now. I was just killing time, and the nurses all knew I was a lightkeeper, and old Mr. Roberts was a lightkeeper. And I just asked what was happening, what the commotion was. And they said, Mr. Roberts is dying. His vital signs are way out of whack, and it didn't look good. And I asked the nurse, I said, can I go in speak to him? And he said, sure, right? He's there by himself, midnight. So I went into his room. He was asleep and, in discomfort. And I guess he was soon checking himself through the pearly gates. I don't know, but for some reason, I just started thinking, he lived and breathed that Long Point Lighthouse. So I started talking to him, saying, Jack, the fog is rolling in. Back then, you had to manually turn on the foghorn, and everything was manual the years that he was a lightkeeper. So I just started talking, you got to get up, you got to go down and turn on the foghorn. The fog is rolling in. And then I started talking other things about the light need to be shined. And I probably done it for a half an hour, just lightkeeper to lightkeeper interaction. And I get a moan or a groan at him. And when I was leaving, I used to keep a picture in my wallet, a little 2x3 picture of Long Point, really nice picture of a sunset. And I laid it on his desk there next to his bed and went back to my room, went to sleep. And next morning I woke up, I was getting discharged, and the nurse came in to me before she left for her 8 o'clock shift to go home. And she said to me, Barry, I don't know what you said to Mr. Roberts last night, but his vital signs are all back. He's doing really good, and he's going to make it. And I got discharged. I never did see him. And he recovered from his hip surgery and went into a long-term room at the hospital in Twillingate with a view of the ocean, which is what he always requested, and lived another several years. But I don't know if it was anything I had to do, but I give it a shot. I spoke some old-fashioned Lightkeeper lingo to him, and I think deep down he might have responded.
It sure sounds like it. Again, you may have saved another life there. A Lightkeeper was on watch once again. That is such a great story. I can completely understand how you saying that stuff would have meant so much to him.
You can order Barry Porter's book, Adventures of a Lightkeeper, directly from the publisher, Flanker Press, at flankerpress.com. You can also order it from Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and other online booksellers. Barry also tells us that if you contact him on Facebook, you can get a signed copy directly from him. Just get on Facebook and do a search for Barry Porter, author.
There are lots of fascinating stories still to come in parts 2 and 3 of the interview with Barry over the next 2 weeks on this podcast.
Here's a little bit more about Long Point Lighthouse, where Barry spent much of his career. It's in the community of Crow Head on the island of Twillingate, which is accessible by road from the mainland. It's one of 23 light stations in Newfoundland that remains staffed, and there are tours available to the public.
Long Point is one of the iconic lighthouses of Atlantic Canada, and from the pictures I've seen, it looks like they've done an excellent job with the exhibits there. I'm hoping to take a trip up that way next year if things go right.
If you listen to this podcast with Apple Podcasts, please be sure to rate and review us, and be sure to check out the U.S. Lighthouse Society's website at uslhs.org to learn more about tours, preservation grants, and all the other things the Society offers. Remember that donations and memberships support this podcast.
I'll also add that you can listen to all of the episodes of this podcast, which goes back 4 years, on the news blog at news, that's N-E-W-S, news.uslhs.org. So with that, to all our regular listeners and our new ones, thank you so much for listening, and
keep a good light.
Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.